All right. So we are going to start the second panel for the frontline workers and the staff who want to attend the 101 training. You're happy to go to room C. Others, principals and leaders, you have a very exciting panel in store for you today. But first, I'd just like to mention, we are really happy to have partnered with New York Counts 2020 on this. And can we just give New York Immigration Coalition, who organized this New York Counts, a round of applause? We have Stephen Choi here. I mean, really, all of you are here because of their our connection into the community between Steve Choi and Mita Anand, so thank you. We also have representatives from 3 of our borough presidents' offices. We have representation from the Queens Borough President's Office, Brooklyn Borough President's Office, and the Bronx Borough President's Office. They all have complete counts committees, so I want to thank you for coming. Now, after hearing 2 very informative how-to panels and discuss presentations this morning, now we are going to hear from individuals who represent organizations who are doing Get Out the Count efforts on a local level. I am very happy to introduce today's panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Dennis Walcott. He is the president and CEO of the Queens Public Library System, serving the most ethnically and culturally diverse urban area in the world. I'm claiming it because I'm from Queens. Formerly, Dennis was the president and CEO of the New York Urban League, as well as the executive director of the Harlem Dowling Westside Center. Not to mention, Dennis was also the deputy mayor and chancellor under Bloomberg of the New York City Department of Education. You could give that a round of applause, because that's not an easy job. Dennis is a Queens native and proud graduate of New York City schools, including receiving his master's degree in social work, MSW's in the house, from Fordham University. Next, we have Julie Menon, who is no stranger to many of you in the room. She has served as an attorney and a civic leader in the legal, regulatory, and public sectors. Currently, she is the director of the New York City Census 2020 office and is the executive assistant corporation counsel at the New York City Law Department. She is a member of the Board of Trustees at Columbia University and served for 7 years as the chair of Community Board 1 in Lower Manhattan, leading the area's resurgence after 9/11. And she's the one writing the checks. Did I? Sorry, no. But Julie is managing the city's Complete Count Fund, which was created by the city administration and city council to fund New York City census efforts across the city. Next, we have Dr. Stephen J. Corwin, President and Chief Executive Officer of New York Presbyterian, one of the nation's most comprehensive healthcare systems. Under his leadership, New York Presbyterian has nearly doubled in size, with more than 47,000 employees, 10 hospitals, 200 clinics, and practices. Dr. Corwin also co-chairs the Healthcare Counts Complete Count Committee, and he's also on ABNY's Organizing and Action Committee. Thank you, Dr. Corwin. And last, but certainly not least, of the panelists is Vincent Alvarez. Those two friends may call him Vinny. He is the first-time president and first Latino president of the Central Labor Council. Previously served as an assistant legislative director of the New York State AFL-CIO. He serves on numerous boards and councils, including Class C director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And he leads the Central Labor Council's Labor Counts Complete Count Committee. And today's all-star panel is going to be moderated by the wonderful and very talented Sheena Wright. She is the first woman to lead United Way of New New York City in its nearly 80-year history. She is currently the president and CEO. Started her career at United Way the day Hurricane Sandy hit and went on to raise $11 million in disaster relief. She is recognized as one of Crain's New York's Business 50 Most Powerful Women. Ladies and gentlemen, today's afternoon panel.
Thank you, Melba. I mean, don't we all want her to introduce us? That's amazing. I'm going to take her with me wherever I go. Well, thank you, Melba. Thank you, New York Immigration Coalition, New York Counts 2020. We are excited. And I missed the morning, but I can tell you, I can feel the buzz and the energy in this room. This is a group of highly engaged and highly committed people ready to get it done. So this panel is amazing. What our goal here this afternoon is to really bring it home and really talk about locally on the ground in the most diverse city in this country, how we're going to make it happen for our neighbors and our institutions. So I'm going to jump right in. One of the things that in order to know how to make it happen, we have to know what's at stake. And so I really want to start with you, Julie. Could you just give us the framework? What is at stake? What do we need to be focused on?
Sure, I'm happy to. It's really not an overstatement to say that one of the most important issues that's facing the future of New York City for the next decade is indeed the census. And sometimes when I say that, people act surprised. But the reason why is, and I'm sure you heard what was stated earlier this morning, but we're fighting for our fair share of over $650 billion that the federal government allocates each and every year. And when you take that funding out over the next decade, you can see the implications. This is funding for over 200 vital programs that New Yorkers depend on. It's everything from public education, public housing, Medicaid, senior centers, Head Start, WIC, SNAP, infrastructure. There is almost no issue or program that any of you could mention that, quite frankly, does not depend on how we do as a city. And that's why it's so important. In addition, the census is about political power, so we stand to lose up to 2 congressional seats statewide in an undercount. We have to remember, we're in a national competition. We're New Yorkers. We got a failing grade in 2010 on the self-response rate for the census. The city's self-response rate was 61.9%. Brooklyn is a borough, 55.5%. We can and we must do better than that. So I know I'll be talking in a bit about what the city's doing, but that really paints the stage in terms of what's at stake in 2020.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. I mean, and Dennis, you represent one of those institutions that certainly could be impacted by the census. Could you give us a sense of how the library system is thinking about it in Queens Library and some of the things that you're focused on?
Sure. Here we go. So first, let me thank APNI and New York Immigration Coalition and all the conveners. This is truly outstanding, and indicating earlier that the energy in this room is just truly off the chart, and really want to say my congratulations to all of you as well. So let me talk about the libraries for a second. So let me give you a figure just to put it in perspective. The week of November the 4th through Saturday, November the 9th, through Queens Public Library alone, we had 214,000 people who came through our doors. 214,000 in 1 week. Overall, there are 217 locations of all 3 library systems in New York, so Queens, Brooklyn, and New York Public Libraries. And that represents a total of roughly 35 million visitors who have come through our respective doors. And the thing about library, and it was one of the panel discussions earlier, the issue of trust. People trust libraries. I mean, we are the last true open democratic institution in the world. When you think about it, we don't ask for your ID, we don't ask for your racial background, your ethnicity, your sexual persuasion, your religion, or anything. You're able to walk in, we don't ask your economic status at all. Libraries are here for everyone. And before I came today, I stopped at our central office, I had a meeting, and then came into the city, Manhattan, and the library was jumping off the chart at Central. I mean, we had our cyber center. The cyber center had every computer that was in use. So people who do not have digital access, they come to the library for that. In Queens alone, every Queens resident lives within a mile of a Queens library. So when you talk about heart count and talk about penetration and getting into the communities, libraries are key in that. But beyond that, we are also a community partner as well. So a lot of the organizations in this room, you're always welcome to our libraries. We have tables set up in the libraries. We're able to have people have information in the libraries. So we're there to serve the community. And I think that's a pivotal role when we talk about Census in 2020 especially, because I view this as a campaign, quite frankly. This is a campaign to get New Yorkers who are out there in our doors, having them feel comfortable, having them feel respected, but also providing the trust for them to fill out the forms. And we at the library systems in New York are here with full partnership to do that. So that's the general response as far as, I think, the role of libraries and the role we play. But one other quick piece, in that as a result of already community partnerships, and I have to compliment Steve. I mean, we've developed this great partnership with New York Presbyterian, where we've expanded our Wi-Fi network as a result of a partnership with New York Presbyterian. And we have the ability to set up our own Wi-Fi network. And so we're setting up our own Wi-Fi network specifically around Census, in addition to our general network that we have in place. So all these are components of our libraries in New York City and the ability to us to help in this process.
Right, thank you. There are so many things there that you brought up that I'd love to kind of follow up on. One, I mean, I think people really understanding and appreciating what a vital central community asset libraries are. I think there was this theory that with the digital revolution, are they actually going to pull books off the shelves? But libraries serve so many purposes, and really the investment and kind of people going to libraries has grown substantially over the years. So people knowing that is a central place. You ended talking a little bit about Wi-Fi and the technology that's available at libraries. Could you touch a little bit, I mean, and I know a lot of the people in this room are thinking about and focused on data and data security, and I know you all have thought quite a bit about that. Could you touch a little bit on some of those issues?
Sure, and I defer also to my colleagues, but I mean, at the library we've been working with New York City and Julie and her team and the New York City Cyber Center and others to deal with the issue of security. We have been very lucky in not having any data that's been breached at all as far as our library security system when it comes to the cyber world at all. And it's interesting, and people who know me know that I am definitely talking out of my league when we talk about cyber world, because I am not a millennial at all, and I'm part of the older generation that knows some of the basic stuff. But the one thing I've become very clear about is the issue of security when it comes to our data and our networking, and especially with the issue around Census and the role we play. So we are very secure. We have dedicated networks, but in addition to that, we're making sure that we work collaboratively, again, with the City of New York and others to talk about how we enhance the security in our systems.
Stephen, could you follow up on that? Obviously, you deal with enormous amounts of very sensitive and important personal data, and people are certainly focused on data and data security and privacy as an issue as we go forward. So what kind of advice would you give?
Well, I think it's really important to recognize that I believe that New York will be a target. And let me just sort of take a step back for a second as to why I think that's the case. In this last round of discussions with the federal government around funding for what we call disproportionate share, which is a portion of share that you get for taking care of underserved communities, New York lost $1 billion of funding. And it went to, not surprisingly, North Carolina, Texas, Georgia, Florida. So we are constantly fighting a battle at the federal level in terms of adequate funding. As a consequence of that, this is really critical for us. 60% of the cost of health care, taking care of people, are related to the social determinants of health. So if we don't get adequate funding for housing, for food services, for Head Start, for WIC, it immediately affects the cost of care and the health of all New Yorkers, especially our children. Now, why do I think New York is a target? Because we are. And I think that misinformation, disinformation, an undercount, helps certain states and doesn't help this state. And I think it's critically important, especially with our children, to make sure that we get this count correctly. 6 or 7 years ago, I probably had 5 people within our hospital system that did cybersecurity. I now have over 100 cybersecurity teams. We have $150 million worth of cybersecurity insurance. I meet with my chief information security officer. I meet with him twice a month. The threats are unbelievable. So if you don't think that we're going to get misinformation or disinformation or an attempt to create an undercount here, I think that we're sadly mistaken. And I hate to sound paranoid about it, but paranoia is based in the reality of what we've seen in the cyber world. So from my hospital standpoint, from the hospital system standpoint, we're willing to provide cyber resources where necessary, number one. We have access to broadband in a number of different sites. So, for example, we have 45 ambulatory sites in Brooklyn alone, 40 in Queens. Greater New York Hospital Association will be providing additional sites. Lorraine Brown of One Brooklyn is going to be providing additional sites. So we have resource centers, the availability of Wi-Fi, which I think would be really important. And then finally, we translated our New York Presbyterian Queens, which sits in Flushing, we translate over 100 languages for patients. That's 100. So we have to have access to translator banks on a 24/7 basis, and we think we can be useful in terms of providing translation services, because you're not talking about 1 or 2 or 3 languages. You're talking about a city whose diversity we appreciate, but the language diversity can be an obstacle, as you've heard before.
Thank you. Very, very helpful. I mean, you both, all three of you, have certainly laid out some key points and certainly how your institutions can be a significant resource. Steve, you talked about policies, how these funding will affect policies, but also politics. And Vinny, I actually want to go to you so you can pass the mic. Many of us, right, are thinking about this, and I think Julie said it, as a movement. This is a real campaign, Dennis said. Could you tell us a little bit about how we should be thinking about strategically and tactically our approach to being fully and fairly counted?
Sure. I would love to elaborate a little bit on what we're doing and really just thank Abney and New York Counts for putting this together. This is, again, the energy. As soon as I walked in, I said the same thing. There's a lot of energy here, and we're going to need it because, like in any campaign, you have to engage members. There's a lot of things you have to do, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but you need enthusiasm and energy in order to make sure that it is successful as a foundation. So in New York City, what we have been doing from dating back to February, we put together a complete counts committee, or the executive board of New York City Central Labor Council. We represent about 300 unions here in the city, from the public sector, from the private sector, and from the construction trades. Collectively, those are about 1.3 million workers, plus their families. It's a big number. And we're impacted because of the amount of federal dollars that was mentioned, over $600 billion federal dollars that are impacted, certainly with their jobs, that are going to be impacted, folks from transportation, education, housing, and so many other different issues in which they're direct stakeholders with respect to their employment. But they also are users of those services, and even point out why they're so important for their health and well-being as well. So we do campaigns in the labor movement, and we do campaigns well. Sometimes those campaigns are electoral campaigns, sometimes they're contract campaigns, sometimes they're issue campaigns. So this is an issue campaign, but it also has an action component to it. Because if we're not acting, then and actually getting the count up to where we know it needs to be, then it's going to be a problem for us that we're all going to have to face down the road. And I said earlier when I was talking to Steve Rubenstein when I was coming in, I said, New York City, though, is very unique, unlike a lot of other cities and counterparts that I have throughout the country, in that at times we sit at the table, across the table from folks in various industries, but we have a cooperative nature about in which we go about work that I think sometimes we see, whether it be in the hospital industries with the hospital unions, that can, if we transfer it to making sure that we have the highest level of count that we can get, I think it can be really effective in making sure that we get those numbers up to where we need them to be. We have engaged, we have a subcommittee, we have union members that are in this room, and we have certainly a culture. We have two things in the labor movement. We have an attachment to workers that we're going to see each and every day as an audience, as a captive audience for this type of issue, and educate them on the importance of this issue. But we also have a culture of engagement and activism, which is going to be very important in a civic engagement project like this is, and given the importance. So there's a lot of work that we've done. Our political director, Lucia Gomez, is here today. She's been very active at making sure that all of our political directors who do these sorts of campaigns are engaged. We have representatives from organizations I mentioned we have 275, 300 organizations. They meet on a regular basis, representatives from a lot of those organizations. And they're talking about how we educate the members on it. But then at the end of the day, you have to just do the census. You have to be part of this. And fortunately, Julie and I have met several times. There's a lot of metrics to determine accountability and whether or not we're getting it right. So I think when you add all that together with the infrastructure that we have, the culture that we have in the labor movement, and the willingness to work with partners, strategic partners from industry, from government, from academia, we can really get this right. And given the fact of how we could use technology to track really what it is that we're doing and whether or not we're meeting the goals and the data that is going to be available to us about what areas of the city were undercounted before, how are we doing now, how do we track it? It's just like any other campaign, like Dennis mentioned early on, and we're looking forward to be part of that.
Great. There are two things that you touched on, and I'd love, Julie, if you could follow up on. One, in this campaign, you said one of the central, most important things to do is to really collaborate and cooperate. And would love, Julie, if you could tell us a little bit about the overall strategy that the city has and how that fits in. And the second thing that you mentioned, I think, was great and very helpful as we're thinking about a campaign. Like, what's the goal? What are the metrics? What are the very specific things that we should have in our sights to accomplish and achieve?
Great questions. And first, let me also extend my thanks to ABNY, the New York Immigrant Coalition, New York Counts 2020, for assembling us all today and for their leadership. And it really is a team effort. In terms of what we are trying to accomplish in terms of goals, I do want to mention that the Federal Census Bureau this summer issued a report estimating that New York City's self-response number would actually fall to 58%. So even worse than the 61.9%. So what we're trying to do in terms of the city's plan, as you may know, we've disseminated, we've announced an RFP that we're disseminating $19 million in community grants because we very firmly believe that it's community organizations on the ground that are their trusted voice in their neighborhoods. So we have a selection committee and we're hard at work in terms of vetting those proposals, and that's a key component. The other component is field, absolutely, and Vinny and I have had many conversations about the field component. This is a campaign, but it's quite frankly a campaign like no other. We need to count Democrats, Republicans, independents, those that are not politically involved. We need to count every single demographic. So that's something, I can't think of a single analogy, honestly, of a campaign like that where absolutely everyone needs to be counted. And I think personally one of the problems that occurred in 2010 and 2000 was the messaging, and that's another central part of our plan. The messaging in 2010, and I can tell you this firsthand because I was chair of Community Board 1 down here in 2010, and I distinctly remember someone from the Federal Census Bureau coming to our meeting and saying, fill the census out. It's in the Constitution, it's your civic duty, it's a law, and everyone yawned and no one paid attention. Now, if that Federal Census Bureau employee had come to our community board and said, did you know if you don't take the 2 minutes to fill this form out, your child may lose funding for your local public school, or your mom may lose funding for her senior center, or your neighbor may lose funding for their child's Head Start program, I guarantee you, we would have had a plus 90% response rate in Lower Manhattan and communities all across the city. That is a fundamental, in our belief, the communications around the census have not been effective, and that is one of the things that we're going to change through a micro-targeted advertising and marketing plan, which we're going to be shortly announcing.
Right, that's that's great. In terms of, you mentioned some of the things that were challenging last time, certainly messaging. You certainly mentioned, Steve, that it's not if, but when. Dennis, can you talk a little bit about any of the particular challenges you see this time around and some of the things that we are doing and need to do in order to combat and confront them?
Sure. I would add to what Julie talked about is the campaign against fear as well. And I think that's a big campaign issue that we have to tackle. And I think by organizing the way we're organizing and building the trust in the community, and I think the micro-targeting that Julie talked about will hope to deal with that campaign of fear that's already been waged against a lot of the people in our city and our country. And I think that's something we have to be very focused about. And I think that goes back to points that were raised earlier around the community partnerships as well. And that there are organizations in this room who may not be in this room who are trusted by the community. And what is our role as community engagers to make sure we engage them in a way that gets the information out, that targets those areas that have the highest level of fear in filling out a form or even coming to a library to do something on the network itself. And I think that's part of the challenge in the organizing, and that means that we have to get out early and early on and not react to things. And I think that's why this meeting is so important and what we're doing right now, because it's not something that'll just happen based on prescribed timelines. It's something that has to happen on a regular, ongoing basis. And we're committed at the library to do this on a regular basis. I mean, we're already talking about it internally and externally. And again, we have the ability to convene people, but also to have people use us. We're here to serve you. We're here to be your agent. We're here to be what a library is about: information. An information source in a variety of ways. And I think that's the challenge. We look forward to working with our partners, not just on stage, but in the audience as well, on how we develop a media campaign, how we get to the local newspapers, how we build the stakeholders and those individuals who are trusted, who may be just somebody we don't know, but through the networking and the contact with individuals, you find out about this person or that person. And this person can bring in 20 people that we may not have seen before or even know about. And I think that's the role we all have to play together. And I think libraries and others are key parts of that because, again, the numbers I shared with you earlier are people who do come into our doors, who do see the messaging, and we're retooling ourselves like crazy to make sure what Steve talked about around cybersecurity and all the issues and challenges we're going to face with this, that we're positioned extremely well to combat those on a real-time basis and not be in a position of reacting all the time. And I think that's what we face, Sheena, as far as going forward.
Thank you. And Steve and Vinny, I mean, you both represent very, very, very diverse groups of people in terms of whether they're your patients, members of the unions. This is a big, diverse city, and Julie and Dennis laid out kind of all of the ways that we've got to reach so many different kinds of people. What are some kind of tactics or strategies you would recommend, and how do we really segment and target messaging and engagement so that we can actually get people to do what we need them to do?
Well, within the labor movement, we have a lot of infrastructure in place for talking to our members. We use it. We use that infrastructure on a regular basis, and quite often we use it for more controversial sometimes or contentious issues surrounding politics. This is a very easy issue, I think, for us to talk to our members about why it's important. And I think, for the most part, we're going to get cooperation from our employers in being part of this, and from the city and from other folks, because we know that we're all stakeholders here, and their lives will be made easier. The community's lives will be improved greatly, and our lives as workers and our opportunity will be improved if we all come together and put together a plan to make sure that we get those numbers up. So we will be talking to our members in work sites like we usually do. That is the one area where we know that they are going to be every day. Quite often when you call somebody, you do a robocall in a political campaign or others, or if you drop a piece of mail out there for them, an email or other, or more traditional mail, you're not sure exactly if they're going to get it. So we will try a variety of different methods, but I have always been an advocate of when you want to reach members, go to where they are in our unions, and that is in the workplace. We know that that's where they are going to be each and every day. And at the lowest level, if we are talking to them in the workplaces, and then they're going into their communities, and we're working with our community partners, and then we're whether it be faith-based institutions or other community partners. We had earlier in the week, with one of our partnering organizations, the Consortium for Worker Education, had 65 community-based organizations on our floor that they were talking to about work that they're doing with respect to workforce development and training. Use those relationships and use those contacts that we have in order to get the message out. So we'll be using a variety of different tools.
So I would follow up on that and say we can't be content to be proud of our diversity. We're going to have to fight for our diversity and the values that it represents. And I'll give you 3 examples. That citizenship question didn't come out of nowhere, right? And there wasn't a process behind it. So I'll leave it to you to figure out whether there was a reason behind it. But I think there was. The public charge. We found that if somebody with a green card was going to get reported for applying to Medicaid, we had patients who didn't want to apply for Medicaid even though they needed it. We had many of our patients afraid to come to the emergency room because they thought ICE was going to come into the emergency room. We had to convince them of that. So it's really important not only to galvanize our employees, we have to educate our employees. We have to educate them as to the importance of this. We have to educate them as to the values associated with this, and then we can get them to be a very effective workforce. And I think it's really important for us. And it starts with the education, and it starts with, as Julie said and others have said, the importance of this is really profound for the future of this city, for our collective future. And you look around this room, it's a pretty diverse room, and we are proud of it. But I'm telling you, we're going to have to fight for it because there are a lot of forces that are arrayed against this, against us getting an accurate count.
Julie, can you tell us a little bit about the Knox and the work that you're doing there as we talk about our diversity and as a challenge and as an opportunity and something to fight for? And Vinny, your comment, you got to go to where the people are, and it's really hand to hand. What is these Knox and how can people be engaged and get involved?
So we decided that we really needed a local organizing tool for people to be able to get involved, because at every forum we were at every meeting, people would say, I want to be involved, but they needed a mechanism to do so. So we divided the city into 245 neighborhoods. We are using the term Neighborhood Organizing Census Committee. The acronym is KNOX, like knock on a door. And it's a great way for people to be involved. They can go to our website at nyc.gov/census. You can click on a map of New York City. You can click on your neighborhood and you can see what your neighborhood's self-response rate was in 2010. You can then click on your neighborhood and you can volunteer for your local Knox. We then provide all the training. We do teach-ins. We do phone banking, reverse text messaging. I should say that we are running this field campaign like you would a field campaign for a political campaign, in the sense that we're going to be utilizing a lot of different software that's being currently utilized on presidential campaigns, so that all the data will then flow in to us, so that we're making sure we're not duplicating efforts, or that we're not overlooking a neighborhood. But the great thing about the Knox is the Knox are then going to be paired in some instances with recipients of grants, the community organizations. So in some cases where they are in the same neighborhood or could work collaboratively, it's a great way for them to be able to do so. And people can volunteer as little as an hour a week, 10 hours. It's so super flexible. You can volunteer from your home, but it's a great way to be involved in the future and destiny of your own neighborhood and making sure that your neighborhood beats its 2010 number. Because let me be clear, that is our goal. People ask me all the time, what number does the city want to hit? We're not going to throw out a number. What we're saying to every neighborhood is beat your 2010 number. Because if we get every neighborhood to do that, we will succeed.
You know, there's a lot of times when we're organizing workers in union campaigns, fear is the dominant factor that is driving, that is trying to combat that campaign. And I'm glad that we're talking about fear as being part of this campaign, because one of the things which we're going to have to do too is, as we're educating them, trying to inoculate them from what they're going to be hearing at certain times, and making sure that they understand that this is, because we need to understand that they are being told, and a narrative is being created that is going to try to keep the numbers down. So if we go and we have that discussion with them, in the workplaces, using the relationships that we have and the diversity that we have throughout a cross-section of the labor movement, as I said, that represents over 1 million workers and plus their families on top of that, that then we can first inoculate them from some of the fear that is going to be thrown at them and that they are going to feel, and it's going to be real. But then in real time, particularly if there are issues which come up during that critical time period that we're going to be dealing with in a few months, that we're able to shift quickly and use, again, the infrastructure that we have, the partnerships that we have, in order to make sure that we deal with that, to try to, make sure that we respond to specific situations in some areas that are being where we feel that fear is at a high level for different reasons.
One of the things when we talk about the challenges, I think one of the challenge also is the noise that's out there. So people are focused on the presidential campaign. And there's a lot of noise out there about that. And I was talking to a person, really knowledgeable person, involved in a lot of activities. And this individual really did not have any sense at all about census. It just wasn't part of his radar at all. Right. He was focused on presidential, politics and all. So part of our challenge is really, as Julie articulated, is using what the city is putting in place to really penetrate what census is about and bypass all the other noise that's taking place. Because all that other noise, including the noise of fear, is going to interrupt the flow of information that we're trying to get out as well. And I think that really goes to the micro part that Julie talked about and others talked about, and really targeting those neighborhoods and not having just one door knock or 2 door knocks or 3 door knocks or one piece of information now going out, bringing people in. It's multiple times from multiple places and building the trust in those individuals and what this is about. And that's going to be a monumental task, especially with all the noise going on with the presidential election. No matter where one stands, it's going to be ugly, and it's going to get uglier, and it's going to get even more, and I use this in quotes, polluted as far as the messaging that's going out on the airwaves. And that's, I think, a big, big challenge that we all face. And so that really then goes back to all of us in this room as far as the role of community-based organizations. And that significant role that CBOs play in the interfacing and the organizing and the follow-up, because it's all key to the follow-up and the follow-up and the follow-up with those individuals to bypass that noise and to bypass that fear.
Great. I'm just going to ask Julie to elaborate on one thing, and then I'm going to do a lightning round where I want each of you to say a few things, and then we're going to open it up for questions. But Dennis talked about the noise, the current environment, the things that are going to be really kind of taking over people's mind spaces. Julie, can you just give us a clear view of the timeline for this so that people have a runway of like what's happening and we can appreciate what's going to be happening around
So
it.
on March 12th, the Federal Census Bureau sends out the first mailing to everyone all across the United States. And it's staggered, so you might not get it on March 12th or 13th. It might come a couple days later. 80% will receive in that first mailing a computer code, and you'll be able to go on your phone, your smartphone, go to the public library, an office computer, a home computer, any computer or phone, and in 2 minutes you can answer these 10 questions and be done with the census, which I encourage everyone here to do. And I also encourage you to take a social media, film yourself on social media, and those of you that have Insta or Twitter, please send that out. It's a great, free, cost-effective way to say, I just filled out the census, did you? Secondly, then, if you did not fill it out on that first mailing, you will get 4 additional mailings from the Federal Census Bureau. If you don't fill it out by then, by mid-May, the federal government will send someone to knock on your door. We view that as a failure. And I view that as a failure, and I will tell you why. That federal door knocker will knock on the door. Understandably, most people will not answer the door for a stranger. Legally, that federal door knocker is then allowed to knock on the neighbor's door, talk to anyone in the hallway, the elevator or the building, and say, hey, do you know how many people live in apartment 3A? And that person might say, I don't know 1. And then the federal door knocker puts down 1 on the form. And that is how over 1 million children under the age of 5 were left out of the census in 2010. They were invisible. they were not counted. That's a tragedy, and we don't want that to happen. If everyone self-responded to that census in the first 8 weeks, we wouldn't need to get to the door knocking stage. So if I could leave you with one important message, the most important message to impart to your respective communities is to fill the census out right away.
Thank you. It sounds like someone is very excited across. They want the self-response rate. That's right. They're the organizers. Absolutely. That must be a really fun workshop going on in there. Yeah. Okay. Our lightning round. I would like each of you to kind of give us 3 things. What is a best practice? What would you recommend people in this room do that you think will be successful? What should we not be doing? What should we stay away from? And are there ways, because this is mostly community-based organizations, are there ways that people in this room can engage and connect with the work that you all are doing around the census? So Stephen, can we start with you?
Well, I would say first, broadband access. Make sure that somebody can get broadband access, and we're going to have a lot of hospital centers throughout the city that can do that, and library, et cetera. So broadband access, get them there. Second, translation services, to make sure that you have language competency around those translation services. And then I think Julie said it, setting by example. We want all of our employees to basically set by example. I signed up for the census, you should sign up for the census. And we think that certainly in the hospital industry, as an example, we have a few 100,000 employees in this city that can set by example.
Well, institutionally for us, we continue to ask we have a lot of unions, each and every union to make sure that they have a census coordinator to deal directly with, because it's an organizing campaign from, in the workplace and within their own organizations to make sure that they are encouraging a high level of participation. The second thing is, I'm trying to put some personal responsibility on every union member and union leader and workplace supervisor. I said, do not have a conversation. This is basic organizing. Do not have a conversation with any of your members without talking about the census. Every one of your meetings should have a census component to it. It should be on every agenda. It should be part of every discussion that you're having, every larger discussion that you're having a meeting to have. Make sure it's on an agenda. Make sure you have a coordinator. Make sure that it is part of all of your, most unions meet on a regular basis, so make sure that is part of it. And we have done that, particularly with our executive board, but as well as with our delegates body that meets on a monthly basis. We'll be meeting again this evening as well.
Great, thank you. Dennis?
So a couple of things. In addition to the translation services and the computer access, I want to focus on it a little differently. For me especially, but all the people I hope, to continue to listen and learn. Somebody always has a great idea out there that you don't know about. And just listen and learn and how you incorporate that. Internalize and own it, as Vinny said. Make this a part of your DNA and who you are and what this is about. Because, at least my third one, as Julie indicated, what did Satchel Paige say? Always look over your shoulder at somebody because somebody is going to be coming after you or something along that line. Somebody's out to get us. Just remember that. They don't want us to succeed. Plain and simple. When you adopt that type of attitude, then you should be out there ready to kick butt. And kicking butt means translating in ways that sometimes may be uncomfortable, but at the same time, as you said, with your staff, with the external community, with others, this is part of the mission of what we need to do to protect our children, to protect our families, to protect our city, and to protect the state, but especially New York City. And if you internalize that, then it really, I think, mobilizes you to sound like the people in the next room and have all that energy and that activity around what we need to do. And I think for me, those are 3 quick action steps that we have to take forward as far as making this work.
Sure, a couple of things. So to build on what Vinny said about embedding census in all the messaging, so for those of you that are a member of a house of worship, a community board, a civic organization, any kind of organization, between mid-March and mid-May, at every single meeting, ask them to make an announcement, have you filled the census out, and then listing the website to fill it out, because literally people can fill it out in 2 minutes. Secondly, I would say, and I started with this note, I'm a mom. For those of us that are parents here, if your child brought home a grade of 61.9%, you wouldn't be too happy. Let's be honest. We cannot have a grade of 61.9%. We're New Yorkers. We're so much better than this. And we have to remember that the odds have been stacked against us with the scepter of the citizenship question, which is obviously off. With it being online, we have to double down on our efforts to work even harder to get the right response. And then lastly, I would just mention, we need to combat misinformation. Every single day, someone says to me, I'm not going to fill the census out because it's asking my social security number. That's not on the census. I'm not going to fill it out because it's asking my income. That's also not in the census. Familiarize yourself with the 10 questions that are on the census. They take 2 minutes to fill out. And for many people, I hear the common refrain, I'm not going to fill it out because I don't want to give the federal government that information. The federal government already has that information on you. The reason you need to fill it out is because we will indeed lose resources and political power if you don't. So that is really the message that we need to spread far and wide.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. All right.
All right. So, the moment you all have been waiting for. Everyone who got 100% on the quiz earlier? I want to see your test scores. No. But first off, I'd like to acknowledge Joe Salvo from the Department of City Planning, who's in the audience. He is what I call a national treasure, knows all things census, and we want to thank him for being here and supporting us. Also, again, I want to thank our partners at New York Counts 2020, especially Mita Annette. Thank you so much. For all the work that she does. And we've also been joined by a representative from the Comptroller's Office. Ali is here from the City Comptroller's Office. So I hope everyone found today informative and useful. Today has been all about tools, tactics, and best practices. So on your way out, please visit our resource area right out there for materials and how-to guides. A lot of those are offered online. Please also visit the Abney Census 2020 website and the New York Counts 2020 website for copies of videos and presentations from today. And most importantly, don't forget, for all of you quiz winners, don't forget to claim your prize, which is a gift bag out by the resource table. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.